The Blind Tony Story, Book 3, Chapter 2. I was becoming a huge database of information gathered from every point in my existence. I read books, I read people, I watched television, I listened to the radio, and I learned from life itself. Jack London once wrote that all conflicts in life fell into one of three categories: man versus man, man versus nature, and man versus himself. But long before I ever read anything about Jack London's trials in the land of the midnight sun, I came to the same conclusions all on my own. In fact, I even included a fourth category that he didn't acknowledge, which is man versus God. But maybe he considered man versus nature as the same thing. Anyway, my database was becoming so large and inclusive that I was capable of a diverse range of responses that made me far more adept than all my peers, at least intellectually. Television comprised a large part of my data input, as well as my day. It was a relatively new medium in the black community, but almost every rooftop had an aluminum antenna on it, as well as a set of rabbit ears on the TV itself. This was the only means of fine-tuning a TV back then. There were only three stations back then: ABC, NBC, and CBS. And you were very, very lucky if you could get all three of them clearly. But even though the selections were limited in terms of quantity, the quality control factor was very high, especially in terms of morality. And even though cigarettes were smoked continuously on the screen and alcohol and tobacco products were widely advertised as well as consumed on the screen, the good guys always won. They also always wore white, and I'm forced to admit that they also always were white. Even the black people on TV were usually portrayed by white people. You had characters like Amos and Andy and Rochester and Kingfish, who were George Burns and Jack Benny's butlers, and there was Aunt Jemima on the pancake box and Uncle Ben on the rice box, and there was Buckwheat and Farina on the Little Rascals. But overall, black people were always portrayed as ignorant, disheveled clowns, jokes, totally incapable of intelligent rationalization, totally incapable of managing their own homes, lives, families, or even their own minds. So we all tried to live like the Andersons, and Father Knows Best, and Danny Thomas, and My Three Sons, and Life of Riley. And we would gather in front of the TV on Sunday evenings and root for Lassie to come running home to little Timmy against all odds. And then we would all escape into the wonderful world of Walt Disney, where you could wish upon a star and pretend that it didn't matter who you are. Only to wake up on Monday morning to the futility of that dream, because it definitely mattered who you are. Still, it was a time for heroes. And cartoons played a large role in my understanding of human behavior in life. Popeye was always my favorite, and I, just like him, always seemed to have to get my strength from something outside of my own self, instead of from something inside of myself. I also loved Mighty Mouse, Underdog, and Minute Mouse. They were all meek and humble in terms of disposition. Cartoons taught me about psychotic behavior like Daffy Duck and Woody Woodpecker with their insane antics, and Porky Pig with his psychosomatic stammering and stuttering under pressure, and the obsessive compulsions of the Roadrunner, or the abusive relationships of Crazy Cat and Ignatz, or Pepe Le Pew, or the scientific acumen of Johnny Quest with his little brown-skinned friend Hachi. Cartoons were an accurate reflection of life itself, and so were the Westerns. where the battles between good and evil were continuous and a way of life. There was the Lone Ranger with his Native American sidekick Tonto. And there was Broken Arrow with Cochise, a proud but also broken Native American. Then there was Wagon Train, Gunsmoke, the Rebel, Jim Bowie, the Rifleman, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, and a list of many others. But the underlying theme always remained the same. All the key players were always white men. And other races could be helpers, but they could never, ever, ever be considered equal, even if they were treated with dignity and respect. They were all token overtures that totally contradicted the American dream I was learning about every day in school. And even though Ben Cartwright was very much loved and admired in my heart, his Cook Hop Singh was still just a Chinaman who performed all the menial, essential tasks associated with the Ponderosa. Once again, I was being subconsciously programmed to see myself as psychologically inferior to the white man. And me being the adept chameleon that I was, I had the wisdom to know when and how to blend in and remain silent. But deep down within, I knew I was inferior to no one. My sisters were also another source of ongoing information, as I was reading all their personal and academic school books as well as my own. I also began reading mysteries around this time, and they fast became my favorite venue, because they enabled me to escape into a world of fantasy where I could draw subconscious, subjective conclusions based on objective realities and get to see how good my logic really was. And I was good. In fact, I was very good. But a lot of it depended on how well the author could disguise his ending. I was learning how to detect subtle clues and inferences made along the way. And it was and still is very hard to stump me. All of this has helped me in my dealings with my fellow man, nature, and myself, and in those conflicts, and also with God, which represents a very separate and distinct conflict category, man against God. I was becoming an excellent chameleon and was able to survive and thrive in almost any scenario. I was much too advanced for my less than 10 years of age. And I was growing up way, 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 way too fast.